Good afternoon and welcome to American University School of International Service. I'm so happy to be able to introduce both a good friend and a colleague here at AU. Ambassador Rice and I have actually also shared a title recently, and that title isn't president and that title isn't ambassador, but it is actually guest coach of American University's women basketball team. Who are Go Eagles, who are playing in the semifinals of the Patriot League tonight at 7 p.m. for anyone who would like to go over to Bender Arena this evening. So Susan and I each coached a game, and the team won both. So we were a bit surprised, I think both of us were a bit surprised, when we weren't picked as Patriot League Coach of the Year this year. But we have accepted that our own coach, Coach Jebbia, actually was selected as the league's Coach of the Year. And it turns out that one of the criteria for Coach of the Year is that you actually have to coach more than one game. And Susan and I have duly noted that for next year. And while we didn't receive that honor, it is a special honor of a different kind that we are celebrating here today. And that is, we are celebrating 60 years of our School of International Service. And today, as we gather in this building, we're in a setting that I think signals the next 60 years that are ahead of us. And this building, like our future, is open, it's transparent, it's brighter, it's a LEED Gold certification building, it's environmentally sustainable. And I think it's a building that reminds us that the ultimate purpose of service is to give the next generation a world that is safer, more secure, and stronger than the one that we are currently in. And building this kind of world depends on new generations of servant leaders, just like the kind that SIS educates and trains in these halls every day. And I want to thank our interim dean, Dean Christine Chen, for her leadership of this institution. This institution that was just ranked by Foreign Policy magazine as number 9 in the world for undergraduate international relations programs, number 8 for master's programs, and number 19 for PhD programs. Christine, thank you for your leadership. I also want to thank our afternoon moderator here, Joshua Johnson, and I really can't tell you how fortunate we are and our whole AU family is to have a talent like Joshua's caliber here at WAMU and here with us this afternoon. And chances are many of you are going to recognize his voice as soon as we start this conversation. And Joshua can be heard almost every day from East to West Coast now as the host of the hit program 1A. The name of the show comes from the First Amendment. And in the words of Joshua and his team, it, quote, helps America look at itself and ask what it wants to be. So today he's going to help America look at its role in the world. He's going to do it with my good friend, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, former National Security Advisor, distinguished visiting research fellow, and former guest coach, Dr. Susan Rice. Ambassador Rice needs little introduction. The breadth of her experience speaks for itself. She's served 2 presidents, wrestling with some of the most challenging, complex, and compelling issues across the globe. She's worked tirelessly to advance our nation's interest while defending universal values and promoting respect for human rights. She worked with nations around the world to strengthen our common security and advance our shared prosperity. She comes to us today with a realistic assessment of the world's most complex and often borderless challenges, combined with a deep appreciation for the strength of cooperation and diplomacy. In short, she knows that we are strongest when we build bridges. I've had the privilege of knowing Susan Rice, the ambassador, the National Security Advisor, and also fellow student, because we were both Rhodes Scholars at Oxford, and we actually played on the basketball team together before she left Zimbabwe to conduct her doctoral thesis research. Susan was brilliant, driven, and always up for some fun, but those stories are better not told. She has been a great friend, a dedicated public servant, and she lives out her values. In a commencement address a couple of years ago, she told the young graduates to, quote, "Be an example and mentor to others. Soon enough," she noted, "you'll be in positions where people look up to you. Be generous about extending to others the support and opportunities you received." At American University, we're thrilled that she has extended that generous support to our own students and our faculty. And Susan, thank you for extending that generosity this afternoon. I look forward to the conversation, and now I'm pleased to welcome both Joshua Johnson and Ambassador Susan Rice. Thank you.
Thank you, President Burwell. Thank you, President Burwell. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Welcome to American. And welcome to those of you who are watching on C-SPAN and who will be listening on 1A. We're so honored to have you here for this conversation. We will get to some of your questions momentarily, which quite frankly I'm looking forward to because I'm the new guy in DC, so I'm looking forward to learning from you as well as from the ambassador. I just want to make sure we're not allowed to ask about the fun you had over in Oxford. That's off the list, right?
I think better kept off the list, yeah.
Okay.
And because
I might
President
be out of-
Burwell's also in her first year here,
Oh.
so. This is
I might be out of questions then, so we might have to rely on you sooner than later. But what we will do is I'll put a few questions to the ambassador, other than the fun stuff. And then we'll give you some time to ask questions at the two mics. We'll get more to that in a little bit. I will try my best to get everyone out of here on time, I believe at 5:30, which gives us about 45 minutes. But I work in radio. I can do a lot in 45 minutes. Let's begin with something that just made news within the minutes before you and I came here to take the stage. President Trump just announced that he is signing a plan to impose new tariffs on steel and aluminum, 25% on steel, 10% on aluminum. Canada and Mexico are currently exempt pending the renegotiation of NAFTA. The president said that this followed a 9-month investigation led by the Commerce Secretary related to national security risks involved in America's steel and aluminum trade. The president said the U.S. Trade Representative Lighthizer can negotiate with nations on fair alternatives to this tariff based partly on, in the president's words, who's treating us fairly. He also said negotiations with China are ongoing, but, quote, "I don't know that anything's going to come of it," unquote. I wonder, Ambassador Rice, your thoughts on this, on what this means for our relationships around the world, and about the president's claim that we're not being treated fairly. Other countries are taking us for a ride. They're getting more than they give to the United States, and the tariffs are a way to either make things more equitable or to at least spur them to the negotiating table. What do you think?
Well, first of all, let me begin, Joshua, by thanking you for doing this, and thank you, President Burwell, better known as Sylvia, for hosting us and for this incredibly kind opportunity. I'm deeply concerned about the tariffs that were announced today. Tariffs are the type of action that gives particular industries short-term comfort, but that often have broader negative ramifications for our national economy and for the global economy. And I'm quite concerned that we have taken a step that is impulsive and that is going to be quite damaging both economically and from a national security point of view. That's why, as has been reported, members of the President's National Security Team, like Secretary Mattis and Secretary Tillerson, have expressed real reservations about proceeding with these tariffs. And I'm not comforted, frankly, that Mexico and Canada may be temporarily exempted pending their agreement on NAFTA. I think the risk there is that they will feel like they're being extorted and asked to compromise in ways that fundamentally undermine their interests in order to avoid the steel and aluminum tariffs. And I think that may actually limit the potential for the NAFTA negotiations to end successfully. They're already struggling. More concerning, though, is that the likely targets now of these tariffs are our European partners, who also happen to be our NATO allies. And the notion that somehow we are serving our national security by penalizing countries whose security and defense is deeply intertwined with our own is mistaken, if not counterproductive.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because during the president's announcement in the Oval Office, he noted that some of the very nations that are potentially caught up in these tariffs are some of our allies. But, and I wonder, by way of how this affects the American people, he kind of shrugged and was like, hey, that may be the way it's got to be. Like, this is important. American workers are getting taken for a ride. There were a number of steel workers in the Oval Office for the announcement who talked about plants that had been closed that are now being reactivated. I wonder what we say to the average American, particularly workers in steel, who look at these tariffs and say, yes, we have to do something. I don't know what's going on around the world. I know what's going on Main Street. I know how many jobs are disappearing. Maybe it's time to try something else. What do you say to the average American about this interconnected global relationship?
Well, the average American, by all estimates, is likely to suffer from these tariffs, and let me elaborate a bit. But certainly those who work in the steel and the aluminum industry have reason for concern. There is global overcapacity. They have suffered as a consequence. But the way to deal with that is not so much through unilateral tariffs on the U.S. part, but through working through multilateral mechanisms to try to resolve the issue across the world, not on a unilateral basis. The reason why the average American is likely to suffer is because, as most economists and every economist worth his or her salt would argue, these tariffs will raise the cost of various other products that we rely on as American consumers. And, you know, we buy cars, we buy cans, we buy all sorts of things that utilize the steel and aluminum. The price for those will go up. And the average American will not feel benefit, they'll actually feel a disadvantage. We need to take care of our workers in the steel and aluminum industries, like many other industries that have suffered displacement and difficulty in recent years. But we have to do it in a smart fashion and in a fashion that doesn't backfire not only on the American consumer, but on our global security.
So put on your ambassador hat for a minute. You are my ambassador. And I say, ambassador.
Not your trade ambassador, though.
There you go. And I say, we need a way to deal with this. If not tariffs, give me some ideas. What else could we do?
Well, as I said, I'm not going to be your trade ambassador.
Well, okay.
I will, you know, I did do the UN ambassador thing. But the bottom line is that, you know, in the global context, all of these flows are multinational, and you can't resolve it purely on a unilateral basis. So what we need is to look at remedies that are more targeted and that are negotiated more broadly, if possible, than the U.S. acting in isolation. We're going to face retaliation. We're going to face retaliation from the European partners, and they've been very explicit about that. We may well face retaliation from China if we end up imposing those tariffs against China and others. South Korea, very important producer of these products that we need to work very closely with and not find ourselves diverging from, not only for economic reasons, but for obvious security reasons related to North Korea. So we've got to be a lot more deft than slapping on 25 or 10% tariffs when even the most knowledgeable advisors to the president have suggested that there are real problems with that.
In the year plus that we've been on the air with 1A, one of the biggest conversations has been around America's changing role in the world. We have a president today whose view on foreign policy is fundamentally different than the president under whom you served. What do you view as America's role in the world today?
Well, I think the difficulty is not just that President Trump's view is different from President Obama's view. One would expect that from one administration to another there'd be some differences. I think the greater concern is that President Trump's view diverges from every American president of both parties going back to World War II, when we have assumed a role of global leadership based on our values, based on our interests, where in essence our contributions to global security and to the global economy are viewed not only as being beneficial to the United States, which obviously they are, but beneficial to others. And we see the benefit to others as being good for us. In other words, American foreign policy since World War II has been predicated on the notion that we don't live in a zero-sum world, that what is good for the United States is not necessarily bad for another, or what's bad for somebody else is not necessarily good for the United States. President Trump has turned that concept on his head, and he's embodied that concept in the slogan, America First, as if all of his predecessors have not put U.S. interests first. They have, but they've recognized that U.S. interests are best served when we have other countries that are willing and able to cooperate with us towards our mutual ends, whether they're security goals or economic goals. And now we find ourselves in a situation where our closest allies are questioning not only our security commitment to them, but our willingness to lead in accordance with our shared values: democracy, freedom, freedom of the press, freedom of religion and association. And so our leadership is suffering, and as a consequence, our security is suffering.
Can I, on that, with regards to values, that dovetails into an op-ed you wrote for the New York Times last year, in which, in part, you wrote, quote, "In Mr. Trump's estimation, we live in a world where America wins only at others' expense. There is no common good, no international community, no universal values, only American values. America is no longer a global force for good, as in President Obama's last strategy, or a shining city on a hill, as in President Reagan's vision. The new strategy enshrines a zero-sum mentality," unquote. That's from a New York Times op-ed you wrote last year.
About the president's new national security strategy.
Yes. I wonder where you see the genesis of that. There are a number of movements around the world that feel very populist and protectionist in similar fashion to the America First strategy. I wonder if, in a kind of a chicken and egg sense, which one came first? Is Donald Trump a reflection of something larger going on around the world? Is he something unique? How do you see it?
Well, I think there are undoubtedly populist nationalist forces at work throughout various parts of the Western world. And we saw that manifest most recently in Italy. But in the United States and in the Western countries where that has proven to be a factor, it's not a majority view. It is not a perspective that is widely shared. Even among those that supported President Trump, I don't think they viewed their vote for President Trump, for the most part, as being a vote for retreat from global leadership. Now, there are some, undoubtedly, who may have seen it that way. But I think we have to be mindful that there are forces, there are economic forces, there are social forces, there are population movements, there's conflict. There are a lot of things that are leaving people feeling more vulnerable and insecure. But the notion that we reinforce our security by putting up barriers, whether they're economic barriers or security barriers, and try to pretend that the rest of the world can be held at bay, fundamentally misunderstand the nature of the world we live in. We are past the point of being able to disentangle ourselves economically or from a security point of view from the rest of the world. And so in order to enhance our economic prospects as well as our security, we need to shape the world affirmatively. And we do so from a position of strength, because since World War II, we have been the country that has represented these universal values and that the world has looked to come together to deal with the toughest problems that we face. So in my experience, in my tenure in the Obama administration, we had to bring the world together to deal with things ranging from the Ebola epidemic to Russian invasion of Crimea and Ukraine to the ISIS threat. There were no shortage of global challenges that arise that need American leadership. And in the absence of American leadership, nothing, frankly, happens.
Are there one or two in particular that rise to the top of the list of concerns, wherein if the world continues in this pattern of kind of protectionism and retrenchment, are there one or two that you're most concerned could come back to bite us if we don't maintain our international ties?
I think there are any number. We don't know when the next unforeseen threat will arise, whether that is a pandemic, whether that's a new iteration of a terrorist threat, whether that's a proliferation risk, whether that's a conflict between two major powers that we and others have a great interest in trying to resolve. What we have learned through hard experience is that China's not going to step in to build the international coalition to solve the toughest problems. Russia's not going to step in to do it. Germany alone and the European Union, even collectively, can't do it. It's the United States. And when we don't do it, it often doesn't happen. Or what does happen is that you see the vacuum that we leave filled not necessarily in a constructive way, but in a self-aggrandizing way by players like China. So take, for example, our decision to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, the 12-nation trade agreement that we negotiated under the Obama administration. High standards for labor and environment. 12 nations all agreed. And obviously, early in the administration, the president decided to pull out. Well, that agreement was just signed and renegotiated and signed without the United States. It's our deal. Now we're out. The members who are in will reap the benefits. We will not. And China, which has long been promoting its own framework for trade in the Pacific, is the major beneficiary of our withdrawal. It will have great latitude to exert its influence and to shape affairs in the Pacific.
Did that catch the administration by surprise? It seemed like during the 2016 campaign, even on the Democratic side, you had Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, who eventually said, no, the TPP is not such a good thing. I wonder how the administration reacted to that, especially
The prior
because
administration.
The prior administration, yeah.
Well, we were partial to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement of the view that it was manifestly in our interests. Trade has always been a tricky issue from a political point of view. It has long been carried, the weight of trade has long been carried by a combination politically of Republicans on the one hand and moderate Democrats on the other. That has broken down, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side. And so now the constituency in Congress for free trade agreements is far less certain and reliable. But the polling shows that the American people, on the whole, see the benefit of these kinds of high standards free trade agreements. And so we have, as in other circumstances, a situation where the will of the people and what happens in Congress are substantially divergent. But even given that, I think for those who may have been skeptical about TPP, the decision to withdraw unilaterally within, I think, the first week of the administration, without any effort to deal with it through diplomacy or other means, just meant that we were walking off the field and leaving it empty for China and others to fill.
I'd love to get your thoughts on the State Department and what's going on there. The president's first budget proposed a 37% cut in the diplomatic corps. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson came into the job promising to redesign it, to scale it back. We still don't have a permanent ambassador to places like South Korea and Saudi Arabia, which are countries that, of course, have nothing to do with the U.S. right now. And there is a tremendous concern about not only malaise, but pessimism or cynicism from inside our diplomatic corps. What's going on, and where does this go from here if we remain on this course?
What's going on, Joshua, is that through a series of deliberate actions, the leadership of the State Department is trying to force out both the most experienced, highly qualified, talented members of our career Foreign Service, and they're unfortunately succeeding. But then they're also hollowing out the lower ranks and mid-level officers who have gained valuable experience, who have served, say, 7 to 10 years, are finding that they're not allowed to move within the department from one job to another. They're being assigned to meaningless work. I'll give you a good example. Somebody that I know who served very valuably in different departments of the United States as a civil servant, had been on detail to a different agency with a lot of very valuable experience gained in the process, came back to the State Department, and like many others, is now languishing, reviewing FOIA applications, which is sort of the purgatory that they send the talented mid-career officers to. And then on the lowest end of the spectrum, those who are trying to come in, they're making it very difficult for young people to come into the service, reducing the number of classes that are available for those who have to, the A100 class, which is the gating class that all new foreign service officers have to take. They have reduced the number of acceptances. They almost eliminated a very valuable program, the Pickering and the Wrangell program, which were designed to bring diversity into the Foreign Service. And so from top to bottom, there is what I can only believe to be a deliberate effort to hollow out our diplomatic capacity. And the consequence of this is not going to be 4 years. It's going to be generational. And it's a very, very dangerous, deliberate undermining of our national security capacity.
It's also interesting, I think, to see who diplomatic or international relations functions have been delegated to in this administration rather than some ambassadors. I think one of the big stories that came out of the Olympics, for example, was the connection between North Korea and South Korea. Vice President Mike Pence completely icing out the North Korean delegation, Ivanka Trump attending the closing ceremonies, and then this announcement that the North and the South would talk, and that possibly, supposedly, maybe, the North would consider rolling back some of its nuclear programs. Currently, that's on track to happen in April.
Not the rollback of the nuclear programs, but the meeting.
Right, the meeting, right.
South.
That there would be,
Yeah.
right, exactly. See, my hopes got ahead of me too. But just the fact that this happened between the North and the South, and the U.S. was just keeping its hands off, where does that go? Is that just a photo op? Is that something to make the world think that things are getting better, or is there something real happening between North and South?
Well, the short answer is we're going to have to see. But clearly the developments that arose in the run-up to the Olympics, at the Olympics, and now most recently with the delegation of South Korea going to the North and meeting with Kim Jong-un and coming back with the announcement that the leaders would meet, and that reportedly the North Koreans were, for the first time under Kim Jong-un, this had happened under his father and grandfather, but first time under Kim Jong-un, seemed willing to sit down at the negotiating table with the United States and potentially others to talk about the nuclear program, among other things. That's very much an opportunity worth exploring, and it shouldn't be dismissed. But we also know that the North Koreans have an extraordinary capacity to show up at the negotiating table and even make deals that they promptly break. And so my view is that we always need to explore these diplomatic openings, and even when we're skeptical of them. But coming back to your prior question, one of the real issues now is who's going to lead that effort on the U.S. part? Because the Secretary of State can't spend 24/7 on any single problem, even one as important as North Korea. We need an envoy. We don't have an ambassador. We don't have people in the State Department in senior positions to deal with North and South Korea. Joe Yun, who is a very experienced Foreign Service officer who had played that role, is now leaving. So we actually are walking into a potential opportunity without the team on the field to try to seize it. One other example of how diplomats have been, in my view, mistreated, it happened just yesterday in Mexico when Jared Kushner went down for talks and excluded the U.S. ambassador to Mexico from his meetings. This is a 30-year career civil servant, a former assistant secretary for the Western Hemisphere, Roberta Jacobson, and reportedly she's not in the meetings. So the message that sends also to the State Department career people about how they're perceived and what value they're able to add is extremely negative, and it forces us to do difficult diplomatic work with one hand tied behind our back.
I know this is kind of a provocative question, but I wonder, regardless of your opinion on the administration's rationale for its diplomatic policy, regardless of what you think about the strategy, do you get the sense that, diplomatically speaking, the Trump administration knows what it's doing?
I wouldn't want to make such a blanket certification, no. I mean, I think quite seriously, the number of diplomatic challenges that we face is no less, arguably it's more, than in recent years. And yet, we don't have the experienced personnel on hand, for the most part, able to deal with it. So that, given that we are now over a year into the new administration, plenty of time to have qualified people nominated and confirmed, we don't. And so that suggests, as does the president's budget request in his first budget and now again in his next budget, that there is a devaluation of diplomacy and development as tools of international policymaking. And so I think those are self-evident facts that one can't dispute, and it leads you to ask why. And I worry deeply that the answer is that we have a president and administration that see the value of the military tools in our arsenal, which are very valuable, but don't understand that our power is best exercised when we employ all of the tools in our arsenal, which include not only the military, but the diplomatic, the development, and the financial.
I wonder, in terms of the threats that we face, what you think in terms of the nation's prospects for dealing with our issues with Russia. There's been some recent reporting that said that the State Department was given $120 million to fight Russian meddling, and it has yet to put one brown penny into anything. There was a long period where the president hemmed and hawed or flat out denied that the Russia story was real, called it a hoax. There were also issues with one of your early successors, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who held his job for a very brief period of time, understandably so. I wonder what you see going forward in terms of America's efforts to deal with Russia, both its kind of overt, pushiness on the world stage, its desire to kind of grow its footprint, and some of the more covert activities, bots and election influencing and so forth. Where do you see that going?
Well, I think there's no question that one of the most serious challenges that the United States, and I'd say the world more broadly, faces today is a Russia under Putin that wants to restore its czarist glory and is trying to do that deliberately at our expense and at the expense of Western democracies and Western values in as many places around the world as it possibly can. And in light of that, the fact that we don't have a clear and concerted strategy that involves both offense and defense to address that threat is staggering. The challenge we face is multifaceted. It's military. It's in conflict zones of importance like Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East. It's in Afghanistan. It's potentially on the border of NATO in Europe. And it's very clearly in their efforts to undermine our democracy and that of our Western partners. And there's no evidence that they have been deterred or dissuaded from doing this. And to have a president that has, to be generous, equivocated on the Russian threat, but for the most part denied it or downplayed it, to say that, to note that there is literally no publicly known strategy for dealing with the Russia threat to our 2018 elections, and Congress has not been able to exert the kind of pressure or leadership, despite its efforts, that might spur the administration to do what it should do. It's extraordinary, and we have precious little time to build up our defenses. We have elements of our intelligence community saying they've been given no mandate to employ our offensive capabilities. And so we're really sitting here watching, Putin put on his videos of attacks with new weapons hitting Florida and whistling, through the graveyard.
I do want your sense of what kinds of things we might be able to do, but first I want to make sure I invite you, if you do have questions that you'd like to share with Ambassador Rice, to line up at the two mics left and right. Before you stand up, by the way, does anybody have a good question that they're thinking about? Anything percolating? One or two? Okay, all right. Feel free to line up at the mics. My only request, my only rule whenever I do audience Q&A is to please be generous with our time. One of the things I love about being at a university is that there are people who know a lot more than I know. So the potential to learn from you is great, and the potential to learn from the other people who have questions to ask is great. If you exert a certain generosity with all of our time, we can learn more from one another than we would if you spent more time asking a question that could be concise.
That's
So,
extremely diplomatic.
I'm trying, you know? It's rubbing off. It's rubbing off.
I'm impressed.
So please do be generous with our time as you line up at the mics left and right, and I will start calling out questions in just a minute. So please go ahead and line up. To the question about Russia, give us a sense of some of the things we could do. You mentioned that there are some offensive things we should be prepared to do, defensive things that I presume we could start doing right now. What might those look like?
Well, in the first instance, make sure,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Yeah. There we go. I think we got you.
Okay.
Try that. Yeah.
We need to make sure that there is not the capacity for the Russians to tamper with our voting systems in each of the individual states. And that process began in 2016, but it hasn't, to at least the public eye, advanced a great deal since. And so we really need the Department of Homeland Security and the other elements of our system to be working very aggressively with the states to help them improve the security of their own systems. That's one. Secondly, the Russians need to feel some pain for what they have done. They need to feel that this has cost them to an extent that they think twice about continuing or doing it again. And we have not imposed sufficient pain. We did impose sanctions at the end of the Obama administration, which were an important and broad-based first salvo, but nothing has come subsequently. And even though Congress has voted to impose sanctions, the administration has not yet done so. They're suggesting that they may do something in coming days, and I certainly hope that's the case. But it better not be just a pinprick. It needs to be a serious, active effort to punish Russia for what it's done, because otherwise there's not going to be any incentive for them to reconsider their approach.
What might that punishment look like? Or what form might that take?
Economic sanctions. Economic sanctions. Among, we have other things we can do, but that is the most visible, tangible, and I think necessary set of steps that we must take. In the offensive realm, I'm not going to get into great detail on that, but we have important capabilities that we can employ should we choose to. And I think we at least need to be having internal discussions about the timing and the wisdom of doing that. And then we need to be working with our Western partners, particularly in NATO, to learn from what they have experienced, share lessons ourselves, and collectively work to enhance our defenses, both our cyber defenses and our political defenses, quite frankly, to deal with the Russian threat.
Shall we take some audience questions?
Sure.
I think we should. Please do introduce yourself, your name, where you're from. Let us know if you're part of the AU community, and then fire away with your generously worded question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Metin. I'm a master's student in mathematics here at AU in the College of Arts and Sciences. Yesterday, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum revoked a prize it had given to Aung San Suu Kyi in response to the genocide, well, what the UN has called a genocide in Myanmar. As someone who worked in the administration when Myanmar transitioned into a democracy and Ms. Suu Kyi came to power, I was wondering what you thought of that, even given her limited control over the military.
Well, I think what's happening in Myanmar is abhorrent and of extremely grave concern. And whether you want to call it mass atrocities or crimes against humanity or genocide, it's on that spectrum and it's horrific. And while it's true that Aung San Suu Kyi does not control the military, she is not, in my opinion, exerting the moral leadership or the advocacy against what has happened. She is not in any way, shape, or form sympathetic to the Rohingya. And frankly, that's not new. I mean, her unwillingness to recognize the rights and the needs of the Rohingya people goes back to before she was in the leadership position that she's in today. And I think that against the backdrop of the atrocities that have been committed and her refusal to call them by name, and beyond that to deflect and deny, rightly calls into question whether many of the accolades that she has received for her very just efforts within Myanmar, apart from the Rohingya issue, should be sustained. I'm disappointed, quite honestly, in how she's handled this.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here, Ambassador Rice. My name is Adam Footlick. I'm a master's student in the U.S. Foreign Policy and National Security Program and a program associate at U.S.-China Education Trust. My question is, well, first of all, China has been very explicit and arguably quite successful in promoting its model of development to the developing world through the One Belt, One Road initiative and official development assistance with no human rights conditionality. How can the United States continue to pursue a stable and constructive relationship with China and avoid the so-called Thucydides trap while continuing to pursue a foreign policy that reflects its values?
Thank you for that. That's a very timely question. We have a long experience in dealing with the complexities of the U.S.-China relationship as China's economic and military strength have grown, as well as its influence around the world. And in the prior administration, we took the view that China was most definitely a competitor, particularly an economic competitor, but also at present and in the future a security competitor, certainly a competitor for global influence. But it was also a country with which on many issues we could cooperate, whether the Iran deal or the climate agreement or global peacekeeping issues, global health issues. We have demonstrated a capacity in our mutual interests to work together on important global issues and to resolve some difficult bilateral issues effectively as well. I'm concerned that on the one hand, we have in documents like the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy equated Russia and China in almost every sentence as co-equal enemies, which I would argue Russia has put itself in the category of our adversary. I don't believe China explicitly has yet, and I think that the jury is out on that, and we should not create a foregone conclusion by how we treat China. We know how to manage that relationship if we do so deftly with very hands-on engagement at the highest levels, and we see both the competitive aspects of the relationship clearly as well as the potentially cooperative aspects. But when it comes to things like One Belt, One Road and global competition for influence, China is not doing anything new. It is the United States is doing something new. And that new thing is what we started the conversation on, which is basically walking off the world stage, cutting back our assistance, cutting back our diplomatic capacity, refusing to advocate for our values and for democracy and respect for human rights. We've sort of gone into a shell. And in the meantime, China is saying, well, hey, you know, it's a wide open field for us now. And that's very dangerous. It's dangerous to our leadership, it's dangerous to our security, and it gives countries, whether in the developing world or elsewhere, no difficult choices to make. And that's a problem. So we have capacity to correct our role and how we engage the rest of the world, even if we're not going to put the kinds of money into development that they may put into One Belt, One Road. The kinds of support we provide in countries around the world, and I hope will continue to, is critically important. And we can't walk off the stage and we can't abandon our values.
Let's keep going with the next question.
Hello, Ambassador Rice. My name is Julian Goldstein, freshman international relations and public administration major from actually Crosstown Howard University. but I am a young person now. I've done a wealth of internships with members of Congress. I'm now actually an Air Force reservist, ROTC program. I know, well, international relations has been my passion since I was about 12 years old. Know the various avenues and ways to kind of break into the field as a young person, emerging in our world. However, with the constraints that you see emerging in current U.S. foreign policy and recruiting, what would you say is the role of young people to engage and connect to follow that path?
Well, that's great. Thank you for asking that, and thank you for your interest in serving internationally. Despite everything I said about how much concern I and others have about what's going on in the State Department, I am a passionate advocate to this day for young people serving in government and getting into the Foreign Service and the civil service and the career military and the intelligence community. If we lose your generation of committed, talented, engaged young people because they feel discouraged or concerned about what we hope will be an aberration in history and in our trajectory rather than a new normal, then we have lost more than however long this trend lasts for. We will have lost yet another generation, and we cannot afford that. We need you and your cohort to be committed and willing to serve. And we have a problem across the federal government where that long precedes the current administration, and that is that our federal service, our federal workforce is aging and is leaving the stage gradually, and it's not being replaced by sufficient young talent. And I can tell you that, as many challenges as I have faced in my career, I would not trade for a minute the opportunity that I've had to serve at junior levels and at the highest levels. There's nothing more rewarding than working on the toughest problems with smart people and serving your country. And I would plead with you to stay on course, don't give up, get all the skills and training that you possibly can, and then come back hungry.
Before we get to the next question, I wonder if by way of career advice, if I could ask you to fill in a blank. I never could have been a good diplomat if I hadn't blank. I never could have been a good diplomat if I hadn't blank.
I think being an athlete has...
Being an athlete?
Yes.
You never could have been a good diplomat if you hadn't been an athlete. Why is that?
I think in athletics you learn teamwork. You learn when to be aggressive and when to play defense. You have to see the entire, take basketball, for example. You have to see the whole court, and you have to understand your opponent's weaknesses and take advantage of those. Diplomacy is the art of getting your interests served through negotiation. And to do that, you need to know your strengths, you need to know your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, and then you need to work with others to advance your interests. And sports is a lot about that. And also, I think, for me, at least, sports, I think, taught me not to be afraid to take a punch and not to be afraid to throw an elbow if I have to. And that's all worth knowing.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Ambassador Rice. First of all, thank you for your service to our country. I think I speak on behalf of most people here. We really appreciate it. My name is Alex Tesler. I'm a second-year U.S. Foreign Policy National Security student here at AU. My question is not so much for people who are looking to get into national security, but for people who are already in national security. We've heard the agency referred to as Nazi Germany. The president decided to give a speech in front of the memorial wall at the agency where he used it as a political spiel. The Justice Department has been called biased. The FBI has been called rigged. How would you tell current national security employees how they can go about continuing on with their job protecting our country, and what advice would you give to people who currently work in the field? Thank you.
My advice, and I do get asked this fairly frequently, is to stay strong and to know why you're serving. You're here doing the work you're doing because you care deeply about our country. And you care deeply about our values and about our democracy and about our institutions. And it's a similar point to the one I made to the student from Howard. If the experienced, talented, committed people that serve our national security agencies across the board, and you characterize them appropriately, find themselves discouraged or driven out because we are in a moment where the extraordinarily important work they do is often denigrated on a daily basis, then we will be leaving a gap in our capacity that will be very long-lasting and that will be only advantageous to our adversaries and only further diminish our democratic strength and cohesion. So this is a time when people have to suck it up and stay strong and realize that they're there for the right reasons, keep their heads down and do their jobs, and know that despite what they might hear on television or through Twitter, that the American people understand what they're doing and value what they're doing, and that we could not be who we are without them.
My apologies, but we've only got time for one more question, and then we're going to have one more question to wrap up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador Rice. My name is Blake. I'm an undergraduate freshman here at SIS, and also I'd like to thank you on this happy International Women's Day for being a strong woman in international law. So, the United States, obviously, as we've discussed, has retreated on the diplomatic front on purpose in a lot of regards. If this is to be the long-term case, what is the potential viability of empowering local economic and military blocs to moderate their own security? I think of whether through hard or soft power. I think of when ECOWAS invaded the Gambia and peacefully deposed President Jammeh without incident to solve what could have very well been a disastrous and bloody affair in sub-Saharan Africa. So what can the United States do to help develop and coerce local economic and military blocs to moderate their own security and with the absence of the United States?
Okay, first of all, if the United States is absent on a long-term basis, we're all in deep trouble. So I like to hope and believe that this is a temporary state of affairs rather than a long-term one. But even when the United States is leading robustly internationally, we have a real stake in building the capacity of local, or I would call them regional, elements to bear greater responsibility for their own security and as well as their economic development. And so I like the example you raised of ECOWAS. There are many others within Africa and beyond. There's SADC, there's IGAD, there's a number of regional groupings, and then there is the African Union itself, just to talk about Africa for a minute. All of those entities, from the regional to the continental, are valuable, and we have a stake in strengthening their capacity. And over the years, the United States has invested significant resources in trying to build the capacity, not just military, but economic and diplomatic and otherwise, of regional entities and continent-wide entities like ECOWAS and the African Union, for the right reasons, because we can't do everything, we shouldn't have to do everything, and we are better off when others can do more, particularly in their own backyards. That's not a function of whether we're leading to our fullest capacity or not. We have that interest. And I hope that, in the current context, where we may be less present in parts of the world that would expect us to be there, that we will continue to be able to catalyze their own interest in building their regional capacity to take on these challenges. But it is a capacity that we need regardless of the nature of American leadership.
Last thing I would ask simply is just what's next for you? 2018 midterms are coming up.
What's that got to do with anything?
Well, you know, some people vote.
I
you know.
definitely vote. Definitely, everybody definitely vote.
Yes,
Please,
indeed.
Please.
I wonder
especially
what's-
the students.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wonder what's next for you, whether you will be at all politically active, helping Democratic candidates or helping with Democratic advocacy, whether you are content to hang out at AU and teach and kind of take a break for a while. What's next for you?
Jeez. Well, first of all, I am content to be at AU, and I'm grateful to be at AU.
And I didn't mean to say break like she shifted into first gear. I didn't mean. This is what's wrong when the president of the university is looking at you going, what? Sorry,
So
go ahead.
AU's all good, and I'm very happy to be part of the SIS family. But more broadly, I'm writing a book, and I am doing some speaking, and I'm writing on national security issues as the spirit moves me. And I am happy now to be living a life where I'm in control of my own schedule. I can go see my daughter's basketball and soccer games and go visit my son at college. I can hang out and have dinner with my husband. And my life is my own. So I'd like to keep it that way for as long as I can. That does not preclude helping fellow Democrats do what I believe we must, which is to put in a very strong performance in the midterm elections. And I will do my part in probably ways not very visible to be of assistance where I can. To be candid, think of myself as less of a political person and more of a policy person. But I have chosen to work in policy by virtue of being a political appointee. And I am a Democrat. I'm proud of that, and I want to see Democrats succeed. But more importantly, I want to see our country come together and us across party lines reaffirm our commitment to our core founding values. And I'm worried, profoundly worried, that we're in a period where we're being pulled apart, not only on the basis of party, but on the basis of geography and religion and race, socioeconomic divisions, and that as a consequence, we are being weakened from within. And if I have an even bigger mission than any partisan mission, it's to be part of trying to find ways to heal our national fabric.
And to those Democrats who are running in districts, say, that flipped from Obama to Trump in 2016, who are dealing with voters who are saying, I finally feel proud of my country. I feel like I have a president who is going to make America great again. I feel like Washington is paying attention to me. I feel like I'm being validated. I feel like the world is finally on notice that a new day has come. For Democrats who are trying to win those people back, what would you say to them? What is it that Democrats need to say to those voters who now feel like the White House is paying attention?
Well, first of all, to the extent there are voters who feel that way, I'm happy for them. But I think the real question is, do they feel that way because the words are compelling or because their circumstances have improved? Because I think one of the risks we face is that a lot of big promises have been made to people who have felt that they have suffered as a result of our economic transformation or dislocations. And the promises that have been made that they will receive money in their pockets, that we will bring back industry that's gone abroad, that we will level the playing field, I think by any objective measure have not yet been fulfilled. And I worry that when that reality sinks in, that they will be even more disaffected and even harder to reach by either political party. And I think what we need are Americans engaged in our system and believing that respectful debate and the democratic process, as messy and as frustrating as it can be, is the best option we have. And what I worry about more than any partisan political issue is that we risk having young people and older people coming to the conclusion that they needn't be vested in our democratic institutions, that there are alternatives that are worth trying. And we see those modeled in some other parts of the world, and they are very, very different from what we have long valued and stood for, and what I think is right. And so I'm much more worried about, if a voter is happy with his vote or her vote, good on them. But if they get their hearts broken and they come to conclude that there is no form of government in Washington that will serve their interests, then we're in real trouble. And that's what I hope we can avoid.
It's been a pleasure spending this time with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and
Sasha.
gentlemen, Ambassador Susan Rice.
Thank you.
Thank you.